All right, hello everybody. Thank you, take two. So I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about what Anduro is. This whole makerspace is about highlighting the new efforts that Marathon is taking to try to stimulate new forms of Bitcoin adoption. And so Anduro at a high level is a multi-sidechain platform. What that means is that we're trying to extend Bitcoin infrastructure and all the while find new ways that Bitcoin can head in the direction of. So what are new use cases? What are new types of applications? But also what is new infrastructure? So right here on this slide, I'm just kind of diagramming out what Anduro, what is the product suite really, what is it offering? And at the base level, you have Bitcoin miners, right? There's no secret why Marathon would be supporting this type of layer 2 initiative. It's largely because Bitcoin miners want to see incremental transaction fees. And so a lot of people make that pitch of new transaction fees, but they don't really have a coherent story of how to stimulate those new fees. And part of what we want to do is, at the center of it all, we have an Anduro collective. A collective, a federation, a group of entities that are securing this immutable link between Anduro sidechains, the new infrastructure, and Bitcoin, the main chain. On the side of the Anduro collective, you obviously have these sidechains, the ones that are actually serving as the layer for applications to be built on. And you have, of course, the Bitcoin main chain, where the Bitcoin is actually being pegged to the native asset of these Anduro sidechains. So, highlighting a few things from here. Number one, every single sidechain we build does not have an altcoin native asset. In other words, you see here this link, the one-to-one Bitcoin to Anduro BTC. Every single sidechain is linked to Bitcoin on the native asset front. We're not creating an altcoin, we're not creating any ICO. That's one of the most important qualities of what we're trying to build. Number two, you can see that miners, insofar as they're contributing to proof of work on Bitcoin, can also do the same for Anduro. And so actually, the same proof of work that goes into Bitcoin, SHA-256, is the same proof of work going into all of these Anduro sidechains. You might wonder, what is the benefit for a Bitcoin miner to participate in Anduro consensus? You're earning Bitcoin-denominated transaction fees from Bitcoin and from a number of new networks all alike. And the Anduro collective sits at the center because that's really the redemption mechanism of the native assets of the sidechains to get back into Bitcoin, vice versa. So in terms of the stakeholders, just to go over like what is this ecosystem being created for, obviously miners are at the heart of it, right? We're a Bitcoin miner. We're doing this because we think that we need more transaction fees. The collective is, of course, you could say the governance council. There's no token at the heart of governance. It's simply recruiting organizations, much to the stature of Marathon, to secure the fact that this remains a Bitcoin sidechain, not just any other type of sidechain. You have holders. Everybody's talking about how we can unlock Bitcoin's liquidity, how can we, stimulate new forms of Bitcoin adoption. Well, we're one of the biggest Bitcoin holders. We understand the psychology of what it takes to unlock that sort of Bitcoin liquidity. Builders, right? We're building sidechains, we're building permissionless stacks, or trying to promote permissionless innovation in Bitcoin with new applications. Retail, look, Bitcoin right now is not usable by a lot of everyday people because the fees can be too high or they can be too volatile. That's part of what we're trying to do, is build sidechains to make it more accessible for retail and, of course, institutions. I think right now with the ETF, that's what's dominating the narrative on how can institutional adoption of Bitcoin look like. It can actually be much more than that. And I think specifically we can have a world in which institutions adopt Bitcoin not via BlackRock, but actually via some use case, via their own business processes. The technology itself, the three parts I want to highlight. Number one is hybrid consensus. Every single thing that we're building, all these sidechains, they're in part relying on proof of work, and they're in part relying on this collective, right? The idea being that we want to guarantee things like MEV resistance. We want to be able to guarantee faster block times. And that's, of course, not possible with probabilistic finality. But at the same time, we do want to maintain the role of Bitcoin mining and the role of proof of work in order to, again, keep the incentives tied to the underlying Bitcoin consensus. Bitcoin peg native assets, I've already gone over this. We're not creating any altcoin. There's no token fundraise. And multi-chain. I think this is one of the most important points. There's a lot of Bitcoin layer 2s and sidechains out there. We're a multi-sidechain platform. We have an EVM stack. We have a UTXO stack. We're agnostic to the tools that builders use to build applications. All we want to do is make Bitcoin more accessible. And so I'm going to start here with our first sidechain coordinate. We basically took a fork of Bitcoin Core. We slapped on some extra features to make it more usable for ordinals builders, for Lightning advocates, for anybody who wants to build something on Bitcoin, but that it's difficult from a fee perspective or from a feature standpoint. Here's Coordinate to come help. And so there's a few key characteristics here that I think are worth mentioning. Number one is that we're innovating the way that transacting works, right? As opposed to having fee bumps or failed transactions, we're trying to make that process a lot more efficient. And we're also allowing users to natively mint fungible and non-fungible assets. So, right, ordinals, yes, it's an incredible protocol, but it's a meta protocol on top of Bitcoin. We created Coordinate to make all of these sort of features native from the get-go and accessible to Bitcoin experts. Alice, on the other hand, is an EVM sidechain. And I know there are a lot of EVM sidechains out there, so the question becomes, why is this one different? Well, number one, again, no altcoin at the center of it. There's no altcoin for consensus. There's no altcoin for accessing dev tooling. None of that, right? The goal is to have an EVM-style sidechain that is linked to Bitcoin's consensus, but that enables the programmers from other ecosystems to come here. We have to take a step back when we think about sidechains and really think about why would an EVM developer come to Bitcoin in the first place. They're not going to come for expanded tool sets. There's already plenty of that in Arbitrum, Polygon, etc. They're going to come to Bitcoin because they want to A, unlock Bitcoin liquidity, and B, somehow leverage Bitcoin's resilience. And one of the core design principles of Alice is let's create a sidechain that is as Bitcoin native as possible that Bitcoiners will take seriously. And so differentiation here at the high level, number one is we're building industry-grade infrastructure. We want to create sidechains, applications that, again, businesses in the real world can actually use. We want this to be multi-chain because, again, we're not EVM focused, we're not UTXO focused, we're agnostic to the tools builders use. We just want to bring more builders to the Bitcoin ecosystem. And our number one KPI is organic utility. Right? Coming back to the earlier part of this presentation, why would Marathon Digital be incubating a multi-sidechain platform like Anduro? They're incubating it because there are more transaction fees to be earned. And so we don't win if there's a bigger native token. We don't win if there's extra press. Marathon has plenty of that. We only win if people actually use it, if people actually use these sidechains. Now this roadmap is a little bit delayed, or rather a little bit out of date. I just want to come back to the use cases and just highlight one last part about Anduro. So I talked a lot about sidechains, but I also want to emphasize that part of what we're creating is an ecosystem. We're trying to accelerate new ways of using Bitcoin. And on Alice, we've actually seen a number of interesting applications come aboard, some incubated by us, some coming from others. And I think one of the top ones is actually real-world asset tokenization. So I think that this is a narrative in a lot of other ecosystems. And on Alice, what we're seeing is, number one, a lot of people value that if you have $1 trillion asset, why not build it on $1 trillion blockchain? Why not use it? Why not trade it? Why not issue it on $1 trillion blockchain? It sounds obvious, but the Bitcoin ecosystem really isn't focused on those sort of use cases. Well, we are. And one of the key use cases that actually we're trying to accelerate is whiskey tokenization. Another one is a tokenized equity fund in Europe to protect French castles. And what we're seeing is that a lot of builders find it compelling to bring these assets onto the Bitcoin ecosystem and unlock Bitcoin levels of liquidity. The other element that we're trying to accelerate on Alice are cross-border payments. So stablecoins on Bitcoin, this isn't a new thing. I'm not the first person to come and pitch payments on Bitcoin. In fact, that was Satoshi's original vision. But I think one thing that could be done differently in this ecosystem is why not focus on the sorts of payment needs that Bitcoin and that Alice and that blockchain can actually solve? And so what I'm referring to here are cross-border payments within emerging markets, as opposed to focused on being able to pay for coffee with Bitcoin. Why not focus on parts of the world that actually need new forms of financial rails? And so those are some of the use cases on Alice. We have a restaurant loyalty app. We are tokenizing forests in Canada, and we're also doing a number of other things, exploring different domains like ticketing and conference sales even, funny enough. But the point of what we're trying to do at the end of the day is, again, bring Bitcoin adoption to a new level. Try to advance the narrative on what Bitcoin could be useful for, and again, make it industry grade and tool agnostic. That's it in a nutshell. So I'll pause here, and anybody in the audience, if you have questions, more than happy to answer. One of the sidechains is, and so like I mentioned, the goal here is one of the products is an EVM Turing complete sidechain that satisfies all of that. But again, we're kind of agnostic as to whether Turing complete is the answer or not. And that's why we have a second sidechain that's more Bitcoin core focused. But to answer your question, yes, one of them is. So I would say that BitVM is less of a stack for builders to build on and more of a tool to link other ecosystems to Bitcoin. Number one. So kind of thematically, it's not really a problem space that we're 100% focused on right now, and I wouldn't say it's as focused on a sidechain per se. But number two, BitVM is also in the early states of development. And actually, via another product on Marathon, it's a service called Slipstream, we've actually tried to advance or help, support, yep, shout out to the Slipstream team over there. We've tried to actually make it easier. I think we streamlined some proof necessary for BitVM, if I'm not mistaken, right, Reese? We helped confirm non-standard transactions, and one such non-standard transaction was a non-standard transaction necessary to help advance the BitVM protocol. So I wouldn't say any of these products are in competition with. If anything, they could leverage BitVM when it's ready. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. No, that's a great question. So I'd say if there's, just to be a little bit. Oh, sorry, yeah, repeating the question. So he's asking the collective, why is it there? How long is it going to be there? What are our plans for it? Why is it even there in the first place? So to start with the why, anytime you're building a stack linked to Bitcoin, whether it be linked on the native asset front or something to do with consensus, you're going to inherit some of the difficulties of trying to build on top of Bitcoin. And part of what we wanted to do is create sidechains that enable users to, or enable builders to have faster block times, to experiment on a stack that's connected to but not exactly Bitcoin. The only real way to do that at a production-ready state, there's a lot of people talking about ZK and these other different approaches, but the only way to do that today with builders now with Bitcoin consensus as it currently works is a federation. And so what that means is that native asset, right? I mentioned that we have no altcoin, we have no native asset to new altcoin native asset to any of these sidechains. The way that we maintain that link between each of the sidechain native assets to Bitcoin, that one-to-one peg, has to be via a multi-sig of signers, and those signers would be, of course, the federation. Now, at the moment, it's Marathon and a couple of others that we can't release publicly, but in the end state, not the end state, let's say the medium term, it'll be up to 15 institutions to the caliber of Marathon that are collectively coming together and saying, we are here to secure that link, that one-to-one peg between the native asset and Bitcoin main chain. Now, longer term, going to your question about roadmap, we want to get rid of it. Nobody wants a federated sidechain. That's not the end state for Bitcoin, for blockchain, etc. But I think the lesson from other ecosystems and from different types of successful apps is you have to progressively decentralize. And so it actually goes back, the last question was about BitVM and whether or not, to what extent are we helping that. So BitVM is actually, I think, one of the keys to trying to decentralize this federation. Not completely. There's, BitVM solves some of the problems, but not 100% of them. But our goal is to try to support permissionless technology that helps decentralize that peg and other elements of consensus. So really, funny enough, people who get in on the federation are basically participating to render themselves useless in the longer term, right? We want this to be as permissionless, as open, as trustless of a system. It just can't happen today. Of course. Any other questions? All right, we'll call it then. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks. You told me.